Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. This is Kevin Ryan. I'm here with Tom Ryan and his memories. Barbara is off screen right now, but today's topic is politics. And from early on, I remember one of the first memories that I have was canvassing for John Kennedy. I must have been like 4 years old or something like that. And
Right.
you and I would walk around the neighborhood, and you
Ah,
leaflets to walk up to the front door and put them in the front door, and figuring that I was cuter than people would open their doors for me more than you. So that was one of the first memories that I have of politics. You were
it
very active
was.
in politics. Yep.
We moved to Meadowdale. That's what it was called. It was a brand new town out in the farm fields, 50 miles west of Chicago. It was the building of the suburbs, and our house was a prefab, like Levittown in Pennsylvania, all ticky-tacky, all in a row, but it only cost $16,000, and it had a basement. It had 3 bedrooms, and it was 1,600 square feet, and we thought it was wonderful. It didn't have a driveway, just gravel. Didn't have a front yard. We had to do all that ourselves. We felt like pioneers, and we were all doing it together. And when we got done and got ready, got the house ready, most of the residents would drive back towards Chicago for their jobs, but they couldn't live in Chicago or didn't want to live in Chicago. And this was the beginning of the suburbs in Kane County. We were near a little town called Carpentersville in Dundee Township, and Carpentersville gave us our name. We weren't called it. Meadowdale was a subdivision. Carpentersville was our mailing address, and the people in Carpentersville were all Republicans. It was, well, the whole Kane County was very Republican. They didn't want to be anything like those crooked Democrats in Chicago. Well, we thought this was the beginning of the Democratic Party is going to take over Kane County out here in the suburbs. And we didn't even have, there wasn't any Democratic Party. So a few of us got together and we formed the Democratic Party, and and we met together and decided. We first campaigned for Kennedy in 1960, and we went around door to door here in Meadow. Nobody was hardly even registered. We got them registered. One thing, they put up a polling place, and the tradition here was to put the polling place in a garage of a good Republican who would get the rent for the garage for the day. His wife would be the clerk, the chief clerk, and she would get paid. And so this was his reward for canvassing his ward or his precinct, just like Chicago. And we didn't, of course, have any of that power at all. So we had to find the polling place. And one of the first things I did was wrote a letter to the editor of a little weekly newspaper complaining that they had hidden the voting place in our new precinct so that the voters couldn't find it because they knew we wouldn't vote their way. And there may be some truth in that, but I don't think so. I think it was, and they complained back, and they went out and took a picture of the polling place with a sign in front said polling place, and they put it on the front page of the paper, and they told how my complaint was groundless. But we got publicity in the process. Our polling place was pictured on the front page of the little weekly paper. So we got started and went around door to door, as Kevin said, trying to get Kennedy's elected. And Kennedy was not my favorite candidate. He wasn't liberal enough for me, even though we were very devout Catholics and went to St. Monica's Church. And I was head of the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine. and ran the Sunday school at the church for the Catholic kids. And Catholics made up a big percentage of the new residents of Meadowdale. That was another new thing to the people of Carpentersville. They didn't have any Catholics either, and didn't have any Democrats. And Kennedy wasn't liberal enough for me, but I went along. I was a Democrat, and I would knock on doors. So as Kevin said, at 4 years old, he followed me around. I was teaching him the ropes of being a new committeeman for the precinct, and knocking on doors, getting people registered, and trying to build the Democratic Party. And I remember one of my first jobs at school in Elgin. I had to commute every day about 20 miles south, not into Chicago, but south in Kane County to Elgin. Eventually we moved to Elgin, but I had to commute, and we only had one car. And Maryland was then, they told about people being stranded without a car in these new suburbs. The women were, and they had these kids, and they couldn't go, they didn't have a car. Now that was our first car, and that's the house, and right there is a driveway. Now, when they paved the street, they came and knocked on the door, and they said, well, we're paving our street for $160, we'll pave your driveway instead of gravel. And so it was nickel and dime. We didn't have any landscaping, and we had our house though with a paved driveway and a paved street. Eventually, they had built basements, foundations originally, and they had to let them sit and cure the concrete and harden. And so it looked very strange because they had put the water and sewer and everything, and the streets and the sidewalks and the foundations, but there weren't any houses yet. And then these trucks would come from Indiana, where they could build the houses with cheap labor and farm country of Indiana, and they brought them up to in a truck. And the people in Elgin said that they'd go up in 4 hours and they'd blow down in 10 minutes. The first wind would come along, it'd blow them down. Well, that wasn't true, but they did go up in about 4 hours. And I remember Grandpa DeVries, my grandfather was an immigrant, and he was like 90 years old. And he was sitting in our living room after ours was built, watching them build the house across the street. And he had built a house. And he was very handy farmer, but he even built a house and rented it out. And he was watching them build that house across the street with about 10 men, their hammers, bang, bang, bang. And it was like a jigsaw puzzle. They brought the walls out of the truck and put them with a crane and put them onto the foundation. And 4 hours, believe it or not, it was under roof, and the windows were in, and it was weatherproof. And they went on and did the rest of the interior and the plumbing and so on. But it was quite a sight to see.
I went in about 10 years ago. I went back to the neighborhood, and the house is still up, and there's a huge tree in the front yard, that's maybe 100 feet tall.
I wondered about that. I've never gone back, but I figured those houses were just as good as the ones in Elgin that we couldn't afford.
This was a subdivision, right?
Right, called Meadowdale. It was big enough to have its own shopping center, so that the developer, he got to build the shopping center and sell that, sold the houses, sold the customers for the shopping center to developers, and it was a very profitable, even though, and very modern way of building houses. They still built houses in Elgin. They called it stick built. Every stick was hammered in one piece at a time, and of course that made it better. It was craftsmanship and not a factory built house, but I think those houses, that's good to hear that they're still standing. They didn't
So
blow down in the first windstorm.
in the neighborhood, were you able to convince anyone to vote Democrat?
It was surprisingly, they were from Chicago and they wanted to see a sample ballot. And I had sample ballots. They made sure I got those Democratic ballots, of course, and only showed the Democratic candidates on the sample ballots. And they'd even asked me to X in the candidates. And it bothered me. I thought it's almost dishonest that they should, but I did it okay. I put the X's in the boxes and handed them the ballot, and they said they would vote the way I told them to vote. And that surprised me that they didn't even know me and that they would take my word for it. Well, not everybody did that, but I got good receptions because people were instant seeing their precinct captain in Chicago. And of course, the precinct captain in Chicago, part of a machine that if people needed coal and they didn't have any money, and the precinct captain would get them a load of coal and have it delivered free and no charge. And of course, on election day, they came around. Now it's your turn to pay for all that things, all the nice gifts and services that we gave you. There weren't any social workers. The precinct captain was everything. And any problem they had with the law, they could come to the precinct captain. If he couldn't handle it, he'd call a lawyer that worked for the Democratic Party, and he would answer their problem, their legal problems. So the precinct captain was very important in Chicago, and he usually had a job as some kind of clerk. But he was expected to get out the vote. That was his real job. And he got paid a salary by the city for some clerical work that he did. But
So
he had to make sure
so
everybody
you said that you thought John Kennedy was not liberal enough for you. But so how did you get to be so liberal?
Oh, well, that goes back to college. I was a social studies teacher and taught history and economics and geography, and I took all those courses at the University of Illinois, and I think that I had a very liberal education, and I think that's where I got it. One of the groups I got into at the University of Illinois was Americans for Democratic Action. And I remember I told my mother that I had joined the Americans for Democratic Action. She said, "Are you sure that's not a communist organization?" It
Well,
sounds like it's very patriotic in name, but it's not, isn't it a hidden Democrat?
well, it
I don't
sounds
want
like
you to get in trouble and get accused of being a communist like with Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy was the best man at John Kennedy's wedding. So Joe McCarthy was an anti-communist, and he was ferreting them out all over America. I said, no. This organization was developed by Paul H. Douglas and other liberals that wanted a more liberal government, but they didn't want communism. They didn't
right.
want to go that far. They're just on the liberal. They were favored of labor unions, and they favored a lot of the New Deal that had gone through with Democrats under Roosevelt. And so they were not communists. They said, "Don't worry, Mom.
Right. Yeah.
I know better than to
Well,
join."
it does sound a lot like the SDS, Students for
Yeah, that's
Democratic
right. Oh,
Society.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Which,
that was in
yeah,
Kevin's era in
right.
college, the Students for Democratic Action, right? Very similar. So I carried that card in my wallet for a long time. Even went up to Chicago to a meeting there of this Democratic Liberal Party, and they were forming the Independent Voters of Illinois because the two Republican and Democratic Party were very corrupt, and this Independent Voters was going to be a clean, honest third choice for people, and it never got off the ground. I
Yeah.
didn't think it would. The founders were real screwballs, and I went home. But it was an interesting experience.
Yeah.
And we met at the University of Chicago, and but I got involved in politics even in
Well, okay,
college.
so we'll come back to this in another episode, okay? For politics in other places besides Carpentersville.
Oh, Carpentersville. Well, see,
Uh,
we were the Democratic Party, and I taught a night class in political science. So they heard that and they said, "Oh, then they got all the women for Democratic Women's Club," and they had me give a speech to the Democratic Women's Club about how important it was to vote and so on, because I was a political science teacher.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and anyway, they got organized and they started not nominating local people for local jobs. And there were some more experienced people about politics than I was. So they proposed that I run for the cemetery board.
Okay,
was
okay. That's another story, okay?
Oh, it is, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
But I got to run for office.
Okay,
And the only
okay,
time
but that's a different story, okay? I'm
okay,
gonna
okay,
turn it off
we'll
here.
get the cemetery board later.
Okay.